It's the week ending Friday the 17th of October, and this is The Week Unwrapped. In the past 7 days, we've seen hostages being released from Gaza in exchange for Palestinian prisoners from Israel, Kemi Badenoch accusing Keir Starmer of a cover-up over Chinese spies, and the death of actress Diane Keaton at the age of 79. You can read all you need to know about everything that matters in The Week magazine, but we're here to bring you some stories that passed under the radar this week. Big news not making headlines right now, but with repercussions for all our lives. I'm Olly Mann, and let's unwrap the week. And joining me today, we have the full squad back from the week's digital team. It's Jamie, Timson and Harriet Marsden. And we have senior editor of the Week Junior, Felicity Capon. Also this week, the Royal Albert Hall has been playing host to the Grand Sumo tournament for the first time in 34 years. Jamie, you're nodding. I presume that's excitement. If I could get you a free ticket, would you like to go?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. One of my favourite things I would encourage everyone to go and look is the photographs of the sumo wrestlers on Lime bikes in London. Yeah. They absolutely incongruous with what you would imagine sports people look like, but it's just great fun.
Harriet, would you go to the Royal Albert Hall to watch sumo?
Do you know, I think I would. I would actually be fascinated to see it. They are so enormous in real life. I was saying to Jamie in our news meeting this morning that when you see pictures of them next to like normal sized people, you really get a sense of the scale.
I presume they're featuring in the Week Junior this week, Felicity.
Absolutely. Cover story.
There's some good photos, aren't there? I must say, we covered their original trip in the 90s on Today in History with the retrospectors to the UK, and all of the coverage then was about how fat they are and how they had to reinforce toilet seats. And I note, nothing has changed. That is still the coverage of the sumo wrestlers in the UK. Felicity, you're up first. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
From Russia with love, but is it time to ditch a toxic relationship?
Would you say it is embarrassing, though, as President Trump said, that European countries are funding that war?
Well, we definitely are doing more. So it is of great regret that we haven't been able to put all these member states in the same position that getting rid of the Russian oil and gas. That's true.
European Commission Vice President Kaja Kallas speaking to Sky News' Yalda Hakim. Felicity, what's the story?
The story is that the International Energy Agency said on Tuesday that Russia's revenues from crude oil and refined products fell again in September, having fallen in August as well. The IEA said the revenues fell by $920 million from July to $13.51 billion and then fell again to $13.35 billion in September. For refined products, which is like gasoline and diesel that you make in a refinery, that means the revenues for them specifically have plunged to the lowest in a decade. To be clear, while overall Russian energy exports are falling, within that, crude exports, so that's your crude oil and your natural gas that hasn't been refined, have actually risen. But that's because Russia is refining less oil domestically because its refineries are being hit by Ukraine strikes, which I'm sure we'll get onto. So the money that they're making from crude is actually offsets what they're losing. So there's still quids in, but it's an interesting picture nonetheless that overall the revenue is falling, which is a bit complicated.
It is. So just, give us a very basic answer to the question, why? Why are Russian energy exports falling? Because some people would say, why is that happening now rather than at any point since the war began?
A range of reasons. Western sanctions is one reason. The price of oil is falling. But I think one of the most interesting ones is that Ukraine has ramped up its strategy of hitting Russian energy infrastructure. So persistent attacks that have grown by Ukraine have cut Russian crude processing by an estimated 500,000 barrels per day. So Ukraine is now targeting oil refineries specifically because that's how they think they're going to hit Russia best. Russia is still, this is a real David and Goliath story. Like Russia is Goliath here, has a much bigger military budget. It's making advances on the battlefield. Ukraine is increasingly making its own homegrown missiles and drones and is now looking to be more strategic and hit Russia where it thinks it's going to hurt the most.
Harriet, do you think this will be hurting Putin in that context? You know, it's a huge revenue maker for Russia. It's dipped a bit. Does it matter as much as Western leaders would like to say it does?
It's an interesting question, because the refined oil products like gasoline and diesel that are being made in the refineries that are being hit by Ukrainian strikes is actually a relatively small part of the picture. That's mostly affecting actual Russian people who aren't able to get gas and diesel. It's not so much hitting the Kremlin, which, as Felicity explained, is the exports of crude oil and natural gas are going up. And the problem is, I think people would be really surprised to learn how much EU countries still pay Russia for oil and gas.
Go on, surprise us.
1.15 billion euros every month for their fossil fuels. And that's actually like mostly only 5 countries, and the top 2 are Hungary and Slovakia, because they're both really landlocked countries without any port entry that's possible for importing crude oil and pipeline gas. And most of that is coming from Eastern Russia. And Hungary actually gets like 60% of its energy from oil and gas. So it's really, really, really important to both Hungary and Slovakia. And the question of whether or not this is going to hit the Kremlin or hit Putin in any reasonable way, it's no surprise that just this week that Slovakia kind of vetoed this this new round of EU sanctions against Russia, because Slovakia's Prime Minister Robert Fico is so strongly aligned with Putin. But he used his veto power to once again block this deal on a new round of EU sanctions against Russia, which would have also targeted oil infrastructure and liquefied natural gas. So it's a broader picture than just Ukrainian strikes are hitting oil refineries that could be affecting Russians.
And Jamie, how important are oil and gas revenues in helping Putin fight the war against Ukraine?
Yeah, I mean, quite. Fossil fuel earnings have kind of directly funded Moscow's war machine. And so obviously reductions then in revenue make sustaining high levels of military spending harder. But it's kind of not impossible. The Kremlin kind of has options. It can draw down savings. It can reprioritize the budget, switch kind of taxes. It obviously does remove some of the leeway that they have in terms of how they can spend their fossil fuel money. But you know, they have shown their flexibility in that regard. And I think that's kind of why we're now looking to, you know, this in the last couple of weeks, we've seen the kind of Western governments talk more and more about what to do with the frozen assets. I mean, they've immobilized hundreds of billions in Russian state and central bank assets since 2022. It's been a big, long process to try and, I mean, there's been calls since the beginning of the war to turn that value or profits from those assets to provide like loans for Ukraine's defense. It's obviously very complex in terms of the legal side of things, but it's a big worry for Moscow. And whether or not, I mean, the UK and some of the EU have said that they're ready to progress those plans now, but we've kind of seen from the Kremlin recently that they've said how kind of crucial to stop that they think it is. So I think that's where we're really looking at the next steps.
I mean, President Trump has been talking to international leaders, hasn't he, saying that continuing to buy oil and gas from Russia is funding the war against Europe. Who the hell does that, he said, or words to that effect. You know, you Europeans are giving your enemy money to fight you. And he has a point there, doesn't he? But I suppose the answer to that is, as you were just saying, it's such a complicated economic picture that maybe the likes of Hungary and Slovakia spending a bit less won't make that much difference.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, he's actually just this week said that the Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi has agreed to stop buying Russian oil. Whether or not that actually happens, as with most of the things that Trump says, it may be he's heard one thing and then it's something will happen is another. I mean, Moscow's biggest customers are kind of China, India, Turkey. They've reprioritized massively. Trump said this week that he's got to now get China to do the same thing, as well as kind of pushing Japan. Unfortunately, I think it'll be a period of time of kind of moving away from a situation where India can actually, it's not like they can just put a halt on it immediately. So while it's a good thing, if it does come to pass, it's very complex.
I suppose the point is, Felicity, China can buy more oil and gas if European countries stop. But what China can't do is make up for the difference in assets that European countries and America are spending to fund Ukraine. China can't help him out of that hole.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think the India and China element of this is really interesting because when Western sanctions and an oil embargo was put on Russia by the EU, part of the strategy was to pivot and to start selling to India and China. So for a while that has worked quite well, but there is now international pressure on India and China from the US, from UK, to try and sever those links to place more pressure on Putin. I think what is not commonly realised is that there are a number of loopholes that means that oil from Russia can be sold to India and China, where it is then turned into other products like jet fuel, etc., which is then bought back. So it looks ostensibly as if we're buying products from India and China, but the origins is from Russia. So there's lots of loopholes that haven't been closed, which means indirectly the UK and EU countries are still funding the Russian war effort. And also a lot of Russian oil products are carried on UK insured ships. So it's all very kind of tangled up. And as Harriet was saying, it's kind of staggering, actually, that most EU nations, 17 of the 27, have actually paid more into the Russian economy than they've sent in military and financial aid to Ukraine. And that seems, even with all the talk, I mean, I think the talk recently about what we do with these frozen assets and how do we realise more money out of them is a good step and very interesting, but it's taken an awful long time. And in that time, we have basically been propping up Russia.
I suppose, though, Harriet, it's a war of attrition, isn't it? That's the point. You know, the likes of the UK don't want to get directly involved. So what we're doing is slowly chipping away at what Putin has available to him. And all of this taken together, using the frozen assets, attacking his gas fields with drones from Ukraine, and now buying less of the oil in the first place. They're small gains, but they are gains in the right direction from our perspective.
Are they, though? Like, are they really gains? Because the assumption or the narrative was that all of these Western sanctions would absolutely cripple the Russian economy, and that has in no way happened. All of the assumptions were that we could import less oil, less gas, and also less nickel and iron and steel from Russia as well. And that is true. We have been importing less, but at the same time, our EU's imports of fertilizer from Russia, which is what we need for farming, has increased by almost 20% between 2021 and 2025.
Wow. I mean, and that is something we can make, fertilizer, right? The Russians don't do anything special, I don't presume.
They are a major producer and exporter, but yeah, that's 20% increase since the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. So yes, our reliance, the European Union reliance on Russian gas and oil has decreased, but it is still very much a reliance. Like, I think it would be disingenuous to imply that Hungary or Slovakia will allow Russian oil and gas imports into the EU to stop, because they can't. The other thing that you mentioned about the frozen assets, the UK might have said that it is ready to progress to using the value of those frozen assets. It hasn't actually done anything yet.
No, why is that, do you think? Is that to mobilise the threat?
That it's not true to say nothing's been done. We have been sending funds to Ukraine using some of the profits and interest accrued on those assets.
Yeah.
But the fact that we're sat here in 2025 saying that once again European leaders are meeting to discuss using the frozen Russian assets for a loan to Ukraine, it's astonishing, really. And it's not just oil or gas or nickel or steel or fertilizer, it's also cars. I think a lot of people might have missed that big Sky News investigation last year about the luxury cars that are being imported from Azerbaijan, ostensibly, but are actually coming from Russia. So yes, it's a war of attrition, but it's definitely one that Russia is not losing.
They're losing humans, though, aren't they, Jamie? They are losing soldiers. Maybe they're losing public opinion. Maybe attritionally in that sense in Russia, it can only go on so long.
Yeah, I mean, the military losses are huge. First 8 months of this year, Russia lost 281,550 soldiers, which is kind of a leaked Russian data that the Ukrainian intelligence got hold of. They're having to, again, look at reservists and conscription. But I also think what's interesting is geopolitically, Russia has lost quite a lot of its standing since the war, particularly in places like the Middle East. We saw, obviously, Trump's big global peace meeting in Egypt that Russia wasn't invited to, and Russia tried to do their own kind of version of the Middle East meeting that they then had to cancel because people didn't want to turn up. So there is a kind of turning, it feels, a little bit against Russia. Whether that, actually results in, Harriet was saying, in people actually taking action or stopping things. I think the kind of precedent of using the frozen assets is massive, and I think that probably is part of what it says for future wars and conflicts. Is probably part of the hesitancy. But I do feel like, from what I've read, there is a kind of feeling that Russia is losing some of its global standing and some of its power. We can see from India saying they're going to stop. If that's true, then that does show that, maybe as we move forward, it is bit by bit, but it is isolating Russia. It is, they are losing that battle.
Just finally, Felicity, this is your story. Why do you think this story this week is important? Because it sounds like the falls in revenue are relatively marginal proportionally, and for all the reasons that the other panelists have explained, this might not be a significant moment.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I mean, I think it's a gradual kind of weakening that you're seeing from Russia. And I think a lot of the commentary that you're seeing is, yes, Russia is very robust. Its military budget, although also declining, is still very, very strong. But can this last forever? It does seem like that question is being posed now. And that, yes, this could go on for another few years. Russia's still very, very powerful. But eventually, I think it looks like they're running out of steam, basically. I also think something that we touched upon very briefly, but just to come back to, I think what will bother Putin is popular opinion. And while sort of some of the commentary is saying that like the Ukrainian drone campaign is not a decisive blow to Russia, it is hurting ordinary Russians. And that's important because you might not hear about that straight away, but it has already started to take an effect. And even Putin will be keeping an eye on that. If Russian public opinion continues to turn, that could affect the war. So it's early signs that something might be afoot.
Okay. Up next, perhaps not for the first time, we'll be talking bull. Okay, Harriet, your turn. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
Is bullfighting a bit of a red flag?
The sound of, applause as bullfighter Morante de la Puebla does something on Sunday. Harriet, what was he doing? Why the clapping?
He is symbolically cutting off his ponytail in the bullfighting ring in Madrid, in Las Ventas, which means that he was retiring. So this is the guy that is considered to be the greatest bullfighter in Spanish history. And he retired this week very unexpectedly. He was only 46. He's had maybe one of the best years of his entire career.
Only 46? That's old for a sportsman in virtually any other discipline. How long do bullfighters go on for?
Well, it depends how long they survive, to be fair. Because he also had a really bad goring from a bull this week, actually. But yes, normally someone cuts off that ponytail for you, which is called the coleta, but he did it himself. So he surprised even his own team. And that has left the sport of bullfighting kind of with this enormous void because he was considered to be, without precedent, the GOAT of Spanish bullfighting.
The goat of bullfighting. Two different animals to contend with there. All right, well, before we get into a kind of general conversation then around the sport, and you can kind of guess the direction that inevitably we're going to go in on this, just on him, on Morante, can you just explain what it was about him that was so compelling to people, why he was bucking a trend and bringing bullfighting back for a lot of audiences?
Well, I think there's a couple of things. Firstly, he had he was such an artist of his craft. I don't know enough about bullfighting to explain precisely what it is that would make you an artist, but he was certainly considered to be so. He was also nearly gored to death, like loads of times. So I think that is quite compelling, that there was all of these extraordinary comebacks and long absences due to depression as well as injuries. And he also had this really intense feud with another bullfighter, a much younger, a Peruvian guy who was quite a showman. And their somewhat symbolic but actually quite intensely passionate feud really drew attention as well. So sort of lots of different reasons why. But he was considered to be so mesmerizing to watch and such an incredible athlete and sportsman that people say that there was no one who was even close to him.
I mean, I can sort of get a sense of that, Jamie, just from that clip. I mean, you know, we'll get into the ethics of bullfighting, but the costumes, the crowd, the drama, the sort of Latin emotion of it all, being the bloke who snaps off your own ponytail is kind of what would happen in a Pixar movie about bullfighters, isn't it? You know, it has inherent drama.
Did you ever have a ponytail when you were younger?
It wouldn't suit me, I'm afraid. No.
No. Maybe that's the only reason that you haven't got into bullfighting. But
that must be it.
Yeah, I mean, from the clips that I've seen and like what I've read about him, there was something quite mystique about him, or mystical. The things I've read is that he revived kind of old moves. He rediscovered like forgotten techniques. He was very kind of introspective. He talked a lot about the kind of mental and emotional burden that kind of becoming a master in bullfighting carried. He spoke publicly of his mental health struggles. And as far as I can tell, he kind of had fits and starts in terms of his career. So he had periods of self-imposed retirement or withdrawal. But, you know, from what the fans of the sport say, when he was on, he kind of was on. And this final flourish of cutting off, you know, himself cutting off his own ponytail, there's so much symbolism there. I mean, it's a bit melodramatic, isn't it? But there's so much symbolism in terms of what it means for bullfighting, you know, the ritual, the rupture, the kind of twilight of an era. You know, the great thing about bullfighting is always that when it's written up in Spain, it's written in the arts pages rather than the sport pages, because it's about a kind of a dance rather than an actual sport. He clearly subscribed to that concept.
And yet, Felicity, let's get to the inevitable discussion here. In most countries of the world, people regard torturing a bull and then killing it for entertainment as a barbaric thing to do, needlessly cruel, and even in Spain, support for bullfighting is waning.
So 7 in 10 Spaniards oppose bullfights, and disapproval is strongest among the young and university educated. And fewer than 2% of Spaniards attended a bullfight between 21 and 22 season. However, of those spectators, those aged between 15 and 19 made up the largest group. So there is a sense that maybe amongst some young people, it's still very popular. And certainly when you look at the footage, these huge arenas are absolutely packed to the rafters. These are sellout shows of tens of thousands of people. I think there were fears that under lockdown it might sort of die away, but it's really come back with quite a force. And I mean, I think it depends where you are. And I think it's sort of in Spain follows political lines a little bit, that it is probably part of their cultural wars. And depending on which side you're on and depending on where you are in Spain, if you're in a more rural region, it's still very, very popular and it's held to be part of their tradition and their culture, and they will defend it to the bitter end. However, when I was looking at clips, I mean, yes, the sheer bravery and courage of having a bull charging towards you is quite incredible to watch. I do sort of understand that it's very difficult when you're outside of a culture to weigh in on it. I can sort of see the appeal and the excitement. But like you said, these bulls, it's like a slow, agonizing death. I mean, lots of the kind of traditions of sticking in the sticks into the back of the bull, cutting off the ears and the tail. The bull has a long, slow, agonizing death. This is not a clean kill, which I think most people really object to. And there has, around the world, in other parts of the world where bullfighting goes on, there has been a push for bloodless bullfights. So earlier this year, Mexico City's Congress voted to ban traditional bullfights and replace them with a new bloodless spectacle where matadors
they just get guillotined.
the risks in some ways go up, really. Matadors can only use their capes, and bull horns are kind of protected with a, I don't know, sheath or protection or something to limit the suffering to the bull. And there's also other kind of variations of the sport where you can kind of like chase the bull or like aggravate the bull, but the bull will not die and it will go back out to pasture. It's fascinating to me that in Spain and, you know, parts of southern France too, such a long and brutal tradition endures. But yeah, I do kind of also see it.
It sounds a little bit like fox hunting, if you're going to make a comparison with the UK, Harriet, in the sense that it goes down political lines. It's rural versus city. It's about animal rights, but it's not really, as Felicity was saying, it's sort of proxy culture war.
It's not really, I don't think it's really analogous, to be honest, because it doesn't really go down the rural city lines. But you're right that it does go, it's very much become a political wedge issue, a real cultural issue between the left and the right. So the populist left-wing alliance is trying to abolish the sport. At the moment, it's got protected status as part of Spain's cultural heritage. It also supports an industry worth about 1.6 billion euros per year. So it's incredibly important. Yeah, it's a lot. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of money
from
in this.
What? Apart from ticket sales and breeding bulls, what else is there? Merch.
I mean, that's a lot. Yeah. Also, tourist knickknacks, things like that. You know, people that work in raising the bulls. They think 1/5 of Spain's remaining natural landscape is used to raise fighting bulls. So there's a lot of money, and it's not just Spain, as we were saying. It's also Colombia. It's also Mexico. It's a lot of money involved, and it has become a cultural and political wedge issue because Spain's far-right Vox party has run matadors in elections. It has a tent outside the bullfighting ring in Madrid. It's also become an issue for Catalan separatism as well. So Catalonia was the first region to ban bullfighting in 2012, not because it was archaic or cruel or because public sentiment turned against it, but because it's a symbol, and has been since Franco's time, a symbol of a unified Spain. And obviously for Catalan separatism, that's not really kosher. And just this year, more than 700,000 Spanish people signed a petition to remove that protected status so they could maybe think about moving towards bans or towards more protection. But just last week, the socialist-led government refused to let Parliament vote on that motion, which really angered both people who opposed bullfighting and people who defended it. The reason that I chose it as my story is because I think it says something very interesting about how populist movements, both on the left and the right, are so increasingly focused on tradition and declaring that any opposition to traditional, possibly archaic or anachronistic practices is some kind of sort of woke ideology. Because of that, there is an astonishing surge in interest in populism among very young people. So like we were saying, the number of fights and registered bullfighters has actually increased since 2019, despite the fact that public sentiment has turned so much against it. I think that says something very interesting about populist movements in Spain and in Europe in general.
Yeah, okay. Well, Jamie, if Harriet didn't like my analogy of fox hunting, here's a more contentious one for you. Maybe, given what she just said, it's like the royal family. I mean, I know Spain have a royal family too, but, you know, I bet even Spanish people don't know who they are. But I mean...
No, they definitely do. Come on, we've spoken about the Spanish royal family on this podcast like so many times. The Spanish royal family are even more dramatic than ours.
In the sense that if you were to ask someone, Jamie, in the street, would they invent bullfighting now? They'd say no, that sounds cruel and silly. They kind of think, well, it's good for tourists, it's part of our national identity, it's what makes us Spanish, in the same way that Brits tend to feel about the royals.
Yeah, I think great analogy, Ollie. The idea about like cultural protection versus kind of like ethical evolution, you know, like how do societies decide, you know, which traditions merit protection, you know, which should be phased out. I mean, when you read about bullfighting and the ideas behind it, about it being related to death and a performance of kind of understanding the importance or the kind of memento mori nature of it, there's lots of ways in which it's kind of characterized in a way that isn't just about the torture and the kind of really awful things that are being done to bulls. I think that the other aspect of it that is interesting is about the youth. You know, as Felicity was saying, that the teenagers that are going to see it and do take up a lot of the attendance. What's driving that? Is it just teenagers being teenagers and wanting to rebel, or is it actually speaking to perhaps a pushback against what Harriet was describing as, woke liberal ideology? Are there people, younger people now being like, we've had too much of this? All of those questions, any kind of political flashpoint about culture and about what we choose to fund, because there's huge amount of state funding that goes into bullfighting, and that's part of the problems over it. That kind of tension over it it exists in the UK all the time about where the money goes in terms of what culture we should protect and what shouldn't we protect. So, I think there's lots of things that we can take away that isn't just, isn't bullfighting horrible, and to see how they react in that way is going to be really interesting.
I started the show by asking you if I could give you a free ticket, would you go and watch sumo wrestling? I suppose let's ask the same question for bullfighting. It's one thing to buy your own ticket, isn't it? But let's say, I work for the Spanish Tourist Board and I'm giving you a top seat at the ring worth €200 with a meal included. Felicity, are you going?
I don't think I would. When I was watching the YouTube clips, I found it very exciting and exhilarating to begin with, to see the bull come rushing out, and I was really into that. But towards the end of it, I honestly couldn't stomach it. It was just too much by that point. I don't think it's for people to come along and say, ban it, ban it, ban it. And it's certainly not for me to say that. I am really, really torn. I get that it's a noble tradition. I get that it's bravery and courage and artistry and all the rest of it. And on the other hand, but partly, I guess, because the Brits are animal lovers, aren't we, really? I find it just watching the suffering. A clean kill is one thing, but the suffering is, to me, is unconscionable, really.
Jamie, would you go?
No, I struggle with watching any kind of gory film, so I think the idea of seeing it in real life would probably be a bit too much for me.
Harriet, I'm saving you for last because I've got a sneaking suspicion, given your Latin American connections, that you might have already been.
I actually haven't, but I think that I would go. And that's not to say that I agree with it or think that it's not incredibly cruel and bloodthirsty and anachronistic, but it's a 900-year tradition involving so much courage and history and artistry. This is why I was pushing back on you trying to make an analogy with fox hunting in the UK, which is, a vast array of people on horseback running down a fox in the mud. There's no necessary, I'm not saying there's not courage or artistry involved in that. I have no idea.
Well, centuries of tradition, that's there.
Yeah, but
the breeding argument, that's there.
I'm trying to rationalize why I would be interested to see it, despite the fact that I think that it should be banned and phased out. I think probably because I think it will. I think a blanket prohibition on bullfighting is coming, and it's coming soon. Already a blanket prohibition on it is coming in Colombia in 2027. Mexico is moving towards banning it. I think that it will eventually be phased out in Spain. So I think just the opportunity to see something that is so integral to a culture and so historic and so magnificent in some ways, I think that would be the thing that would interest me in going.
Okay. I would say no, but if anyone wants to offer me a gazpacho and tapas tour, I'm there. Up next, just to be clear, why you and I are not friends. That's after this. All right, Jamie, you're finishing the show. What do you think this week should be remembered for?
This week I asked myself, do my fans know too much about me?
All right, let's get this over with.
Yep.
Are Dan and Phil in a relationship?
Yes.
All right, bye. Oh, sorry, you wanted more, did you?
Oh.
You want the juice.
Okay.
The tea, the blood, the tears, the
Oh my God.
Veteran YouTubers Dan and Phil announcing they are in a relationship in a video posted on Monday. Jamie, do you have anything to confess?
I do have something to confess. I had no idea who these people were. I genuinely...
Well, brief us then. For those who don't know who Dan and Phil are, yes.
Do you know who? Because you've been
I know who Dan and Phil are because,
world.
so I have been podcasting for 18 years and on a much smaller scale because podcasting was smaller than YouTube back then. But when Helen Zaltzman and I were kind of people who people knew about in podcasting, Dan and Phil were the YouTubers that British people knew. So yes, I've tracked their careers. Yes.
Yeah,
but they basically made videos in their bedroom when they weren't in a relationship and have continued to do that for nearly 20 years.
Yes, and so this video that they released this week basically, answered the question that apparently fans of theirs have been asking for years about whether fan, which is the portmanteau of their names, was just a friendship or whether it was more. Fans kind of built narratives, they made assumptions, they posted theories. A lot in lots of ways they invested a kind of belief into a story. And actually in that video, if you watch the whole video, they talk about the kind of weight of the fan expectations and the kind of invasion into their lives and the emotional toll of living, under this kind of glare, and basically saying why they couldn't have come out any sooner about what they were doing and about how their relationship, the truth about their relationship.
Which is why, for people who don't want to sit through the video, what is the reason they couldn't say earlier?
Yeah, they didn't want to be seen as creating like couple content. They want their kind of creative output to remain autonomous. They also were, I think, actually quite fearful of the kind of privacy aspects of it and the boundaries and, what kind of attention they would then get together. I bring it to the table because it's about basically parasocial relationships. Parasocial, it was a concept that was coined in the 1950s to describe how audiences developed one-sided relationships with media figures. Basically, that idea that we know so much now about the people in the celebrities, YouTubers, kind of pop stars, even you, Olly Mann, people know too much. The kind of repeated exposure and interactions kind of deepen that parasocial relationship. But we have seen a massive pushback recently from some artists, people like Chapel Roan, Mitski, and it has, as far as I can tell, people are no longer writing into a PO box, right? People are able to get very close and intense access sometimes to the people that they are fans of. And, where does that go? Where does that leave the people involved? Is it a good thing? What are the benefits? That's why I've brought it to the table, and I'm hoping you guys will answer for me.
Okay, talking about when we first heard of Dan and Phil, Felicity, I've got to think when I first heard the phrase parasocial, it's quite interesting to hear Jamie reference something from the 1950s there, because I don't think I heard that term till maybe 2 years ago. It seems to be something that is growing, the sense that you're not just a fan of someone, you expect a two-way relationship in the 21st century.
My issue with the story is that parasocial, like you're saying, you think, oh, I've never heard that and it sounds terribly academic and fancy. I think we've always had, obsessive fans and celebrity culture, and I don't think this is anything new. I think it's certainly been exacerbated by social media and the fact that, your celebs are so much closer to you, and they put out so much more content and it really feels like you're part of their lives and you're inside their house and you know all about them. But in terms of having that obsessive, unhealthy relationship with someone you don't know in a way that is not reciprocated, I don't think that's anything new. It made me instantly think of Princess Diana and her death with like the wailing, hysterical fans when Harry and William weren't allowed to show any emotion and, the whole public was just in an absolute meltdown. And the Michael Jackson trial when that crazy fan was like releasing white doves into the air every time it was, pronounced that he was innocent. I think what frustrates me about this story is that parasocial is this label that you can sort of attach to your life and say, I'm in a parasocial relationship or something. And it is just a way of avoiding accountability for the fact that you haven't recognized that you're lacking in self-knowledge, that you don't understand that you're doing something very, very toxic. You're not in a relationship with someone who... You're not in a normal human relationship. And it made me think of sapiosexual, that term that you sort of say, I'm only attracted to people's intellect and their brains, and that makes me sapiosexual. It's like, well, everyone is attracted to, relatively smart people. That's not a label.
Not everyone.
Not everyone, sure. But again, it's just these like labels and terms, parasocial, sapiosexual, which I think it's slightly ridiculous. And I don't really think it's anything new. It's just something that's been exacerbated by social media.
Okay, except, Harriet, as Felicity was saying, someone who's developed a relationship with Michael Jackson based on music videos used to be termed as crazy because they've taken the relationship that's clearly a broadcast audience relationship into something more meaningful to them, which is in their minds. But it's a bit different now because these people, Dan and Phil, any YouTuber, any influencer, any podcaster, is encouraged to talk directly to the audience and build a relationship with them and responds to their correspondence and makes them direct message videos. It is actually a real relationship.
Yeah, and that's what I think, even though I agree that it's not necessarily new, I think there are new elements. The rise of social media and the encouragement of like big studios, for example, or big music companies, the encouragement for celebrities, content creators and artists to actively use social media to create a false illusion of intimacy and a false illusion to give people a glimpse into their lives, very highly curated though it might be, the illusion of intimacy and direct access and also direct communication. In the case of Charlie XCX, very famously uses WhatsApp to communicate with superfans. And this creates stronger emotional connections because there's that illusion of a two-way interaction, which wasn't necessarily the case.
If they're texting each other, then it's not an illusion.
I think sometimes the illusion it's the illusion of authenticity, that the line between public figure and fan becomes blurred, and that has turbocharged these parasocial relationships because a lot of these public figures acknowledge and utilize this intimate bonding experience with their fans, and they knowingly push the boundaries for personal gain. For countless creators, like you were saying, their careers actually depend on this illusion of personal relationship with their fans. And I think what's really interesting is how these parasocial relationships are being sort of hijacked for the sake of capitalism and for the sake of activism as well. So aid organizations, PR firms, companies are increasingly moving from message to affinity. So not necessarily what the message is, but who is delivering the message, and harnessing the affinity those people have with their fans or their listeners or their readers to either sell something or to push a message. So this is, I think, that element, that social media turbocharged element in a hyper-connected world. I think that's what's new.
Yeah, and I suppose the companies behind it as well, Jamie, that are pushing people in that direction. I mean, Dan and Phil, clearly instinctively wanted to build a relationship with their audience and wanted to have that two-way street. But if you didn't, if you were someone who just wanted to make funny videos, your videos won't rank unless you do that stuff. So the likes of Google and Meta are pushing you into doing this two-way relationship. It's hard to just be a broadcaster.
Also, the kind of the content that now is successful is very different to what was successful. I mean, you're right, it's to do with the algorithm, but the content of, like, basically people want to know, get ready with me, a day in the life, what I wore today, like all of this stuff that is basically bringing you into a way. It's not like watch me play this video game or whatever. This is now like, I want to know about the kind of makeup of your day and who you're in a relationship with and what your actual, where you live. That all of that is being pushed up the algorithm. So people are doing it more. So people are giving away more. And I think, like, the hope is that there is a turning point coming, or that some fans are basically watching people like Chapel Roan push back and say, actually, I'm not going to accept that you call me by my real name when you see me in the street, or I'm presenting a character and that's that you're a fan of the character. And maybe we have to question about, like, the intimacy of, like Harriet was saying, the kind of monetization of it. I think it's a tough one because people are always going to want to make money, and if making money is by creating these, like, parasocial relationships, then I think that will always happen. But hopefully, as we move forward, younger people will look at at the artists that are trying to put boundaries up and trying to say, like, I want to protect my own life, and recognize that actually that's a good thing.
I suppose it's also, from the point of view of the audience, though, a feeling of you're relating to the content creators, Felicity, but then you yourself can share something kind of mundane and pedestrian about yourself, which is maybe healthy. Like, we talk all the time about this being an unhealthy relationship. You're idolizing someone you don't really know. You've bought into a false narrative. I was looking at the comments on this Dan and Phil video, and the best rated ones were women who are clearly now in their late 20s who liked Dan and Phil when they were teenage girls. And they were basically saying, yeah, whatever, lads, I've got the washing to do and got to take the kids to school. So it's a sense of, these people have been there throughout my entire life, and it's my real life as an audience as well. And that is a deeper relationship than used to be possible.
Yeah, that's true. And I guess I increasingly feel that anything other than a like actual real relationship people find easier these days. I was reading some really like strange articles about people falling in love with ChatGPT. It just seems to be easier and less risky than having a human relationship. And, you know, seeing like, you know, I was thinking about Taylor Swift. I watched a documentary about Taylor Swift the other day, and the fans on it were actually really sweet and really endearing, and you could tell that they really relate to her, and she has helped them through all sorts of situations. And one of them was talking about how Taylor Swift's music is all about like the permission to yearn and the permission to be a teenage girl and everything that kind of encompasses. And it was quite convincing, but I would still say it's probably easier to have a relationship with Taylor Swift than having a real human friendship, which is going to be full of all the kind of nasty bitchiness and all that sort of thing. You know, I'm not saying that it's always going to be unpleasant or horrible. I'm sure some of the, especially in a world with so much bad news and awful things going on, you know, if you see that Taylor Swift's got engaged and you want to write a comment and be like, OMG, I can't even handle how great this is, and knowing full well that she's never going to give a shit about your wedding, like that's fine. if you can keep it together, fine. But it does strike me as increasingly it's just easier and nicer to have relationships which are one-sided basically, and I find that slightly sad.
But they can also, I think, on the flip side, what's really sad is that parasocial relationships can also create this sense of entitlement and this kind of very misguided sense of deserving reciprocity. So fans can feel like they deserve the attention from their parasocial amour, or they deserve interaction because of the time and energy that they've invested in them. And when that is spurned, or when their expectations aren't met, then they can turn on their object of parasocial affection. I think Selena Gomez is a really interesting example of that. So she's the most followed woman on Instagram, and she's been very open about her health and her struggles with mental health, which many people have found incredibly helpful and comforting. But when she announced her engagement to Benny Blanco, a lot of fans have kind of been really cruel about him and been really like talking about how they need to break up. There's just all sorts of abuse and harassment and kind of a sense of entitlement to an opinion that can be engendered by these parasocial relationships that I actually think it is incredibly sad, because like we were saying, celebrities today, they don't have the option to opt out of connecting online with fans. What that means is that they are basically pushed into creating a parasocial relationship that can normalize this behavior that can end up then really hurting or threatening them, which I think is incredibly sad. And it's incredibly sad for the fans as well, who there's a study that showed people with stronger parasocial relationships with celebrities could end up like less satisfied in their real life relationships and less motivated to invest in them. So I do think that it can be incredibly comforting and also incredibly dangerous for both fan and artist.
There's no jump cuts, are there, when you're having a boring conversation with your friend in the pub, Jamie?
No, exactly. I don't have boring conversations with people in the pub, though. It's all you just
spend your time on Instagram bonding with people you don't know.
All kill and no filler. I will say actually that my experience with one of my favourite footballers was absolutely lovely. So there is hope out there. You can have a nice chat with a celebrity you like, and also getting to meet you, Ollie. Always a dream. Yes,
that's right. Well, we did a special deal for you on OnlyFans. My thanks to Jamie, Harriet and Felicity. You can follow this show for free. You can get every episode as soon as it's released. Just search for The Week Unwrapped wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube, where you can watch us too. It doesn't mean you're our friend. You can also get 6 free issues of The Week magazine with a trial subscription if you go to theweek.com/subscriptions. In the meantime, I've been Olly Mann. Our music is by Tom Morby, the producer, Ollie Peart at Rethink Audio. And until we meet again to Unwrap next week,